Had a really great question come through recently asking about cycling efficiency. So a couple of parts to it. I want to break down first and foremost cycling efficiency today and describe to you what it is, the key components and the factors influencing it. What can we change? What can't we change? What are some of the things that maybe might be limited? And then go into a little bit more detail on some of the follow-up there. What's the benefit of just getting fitter versus trying to work on some of this efficiency stuff? So without any further ado, let's get into it. Nice and simple, cycling efficiency. What is it and what can we do with it? Hey, welcome back to the channel. Nick here, talking science of endurance and everything sports science in general. Thanks to everyone who has subscribed to the channel, but if you haven't and you're enjoying the content, or if you're watching for the first time, please consider hitting that big red subscribe button down below. Join the great community we got growing here. Keep up to date with the latest content. Head over to Instagram as well, at NJ_sportscience. I'll put it in the corner here. Go check out Instagram, some different type of content on there, a little bit shorter and sharper, things that I'm doing day to day as a sports scientist. But then also, that's the easiest way to get directly in contact, ask you questions, send through suggestions for video ideas, and keep growing the community over there as well, and build across both platforms are really, really good, because I know there's some people who are on YouTube, some people are over on Instagram. Head across both, and you'll get a little bit of some different content across both platforms, so you don't want to be missing out on anything there. As I said in the introduction, great question came through regarding cycling efficiency. We quite often on this channel so far have talked about the training side of things, physiology, internal, what's happening there. Haven't necessarily covered things like the efficiency side of things, and I'm not going to go too much into aerodynamics because that's a little bit more to do with resistances and a little bit external to the conversation today. But I will at some point in the future cover a video on that because I think it links in nicely with what we're about to go through. And basically, all we've got with the term cycling efficiency is just the conversion of chemical energy. So when we're producing energy, which is most of the stuff we've talked about on the channel, the aerobic system, anaerobic processes, breaking down fuels within our body, creating energy, usable energy to create muscle contractions and produce movement on the bike in the first place, that's all what we're sort of terming as chemical energy, if you like. We're creating it internally, breaking things down to be able to produce an energy output in that form. What that then turns into or transitions into is mechanical energy, which is the turning of the pedals and the levers on the bike that allow the gears to move to allow the bike to get into motion. And the similar process happens in your car, for example. You put petrol in, there's a combustion reaction, which is more of a chemical reaction. That helps turn the engine over. That turns into mechanical energy, which is the wheels spinning in the car when you put the accelerator down and we get moving. So this process can be, changed in terms of the efficiency of this process, which is overall our cycling efficiency overall, depending on a number of factors. But at some point, it is going to be limited. There's only so much we can take this to before we really do need to start working on the fitness component. So before I get into that, the factors that actually influence cycling efficiency, I'm going to break them down really simply into two categories. What can we change fundamentally? But then more importantly, what can't we change? What is more set in this equation? I'll start with those ones. The first one being muscle fiber type. The percentage distribution of fast twitch versus slow twitch fibers. If you're more of that slow twitch fiber athlete, you're going to have a much better gross efficiency. So overall, it's going to be a lot more efficient across the chain because we're producing less fatiguing contractions. We're able to produce those for longer periods of time. So the endurance guys, the Tour de France type guys are going to have the most efficient makeup in terms of muscle fiber type. But like I said, not really changeable because we can't just go in and change the distribution of fast versus slow twitch fibers. Yes, there's some transitional fibers in there that will react more like a slower or fast twitch, depending on the type of training we do. But for the most part, our genetics is relatively set on we're more of a slow twitch athlete or an endurance-based athlete, or we're more of a sprint athlete or somewhere in between. It's just not going to happen. We're not going to completely change the genetic makeup of our muscles over time. So that's one that we can't necessarily change, but it does have a strong bearing on how efficient you are, because if you're a sprint-based athlete and genetically you're a sprinter, but you're trying to do endurance, that's obviously going to impact our performance in those types of events and vice versa. So really important to understand. It's not something we can change, but it is going to make up a key component, because obviously that's where most of the power is coming from, or the power through the pedals is going to be generated from. In terms of some other things to do with our lower body in particular, what we call your lower limb morphology, so effectively things like limb length, how your body is made up and proportioned, all of that is also going to play a bit of a factor in terms of the makeup of everything going into the lower body. Makes sense. All of the movement is coming from there. If you're more upper body distributed in where your muscle mass is, well, legs are probably going to struggle to turn the power, aren't they? That's an easy one to sort of think of. Limb length is probably going to play a bit of a role. Shorter limb length versus longer. It's gonna factor into the changes in efficiency, because we're changing the lengths of the levers in our own body to then impact how maybe what we choose in terms of bike components, which I'll get into in a moment. but all of this can also play a role. But I can't just change the length of my legs, or I can't change the makeup of what my legs are like. So they're really the two factors that can't change: genetics in terms of your fiber type, but then also what your lower limbs actually look like, and the proportion and etc. between all of the body parts down in the lower half of the body. The things that we can change. Now, this is more of an interesting conversation around things like cycling position. That's one that we obviously can change over time, but we can only change it so far, because there's rules in particular when we're talking about cycling as a pure sport. Triathlon's a little bit different because there's no rules. You can do whatever you like in triathlon. But cycling from a UCI perspective, for example, in time trials, we can't have the front nose of the saddle beyond the middle or the center of the crank. We can't change that as much, whereas triathlon-wise, we can bring it a lot further forward. That's going to impact our cycling efficiency. So there are some restrictions on what we can and can't do. Obviously, you can't ride like a recumbent bike where you're lying down. They're a lot more efficient than a traditional bike setup. That's why you won't see any of those like lower lying down this way and pedaling with your legs in front of you bikes in the Tour de France, because they're just incredibly efficient. They would win in terms of you don't have to put out as much power to go as fast. So it's the type of thing that there are some restrictions to some of these things, and bike dimensions, I guess, is another component that comes into that. What restrictions do we have on weight of the bike? What restrictions do we have on the dimensions of the bike, the top, all the sizing of it? What frame are you using? Are you using a correct size frame? Crank length, the chain rings on there, what gearing ratio you're running? All of the componentry involved is also going to impact your efficiency. But we can change that to an extent. So we're limited in how much we can change it, but we can manipulate it to give us the best possible for our particular situation. And that's why we go through and do, it's really important from a bike fit perspective, not only from an injury, helping resolve issues with like lower back injury, reaching too far, having that rocking side to side. Aerodynamics is obviously a good one from a bike fit perspective for our time trialists or our cyclists. But all of these other things in terms of the drivetrain are really important. We all hear about drivetrain losses. This is all part of the efficiency equation. If you've got if you don't keep your drivetrain clean, it's something that I've been notoriously bad at over a little while. I'm starting to get better at is making sure that my chain and everything is working really smoothly. I've indexed my gears correctly. Everything's happening and working really, really efficiently. So I'm not losing it as much. I'm going to lose something through the drivetrain, but I'm not losing as much. So I can get much more bang for buck when I push the power through the pedals. Another factor that we can manipulate and change is our cadence. You hear this term optimal cadence all the time, and it's a really interesting one. I did a video talking about can you work out if you're more of a sprinter or an endurance cyclist. I might link it above in the description and in the description as well. But just a really simple test you can do. Quick sprint test, see what cadence you get to. If you're really high cadence in that sprint test, cool. You're probably going to be able to sit on a slightly higher cadence normally. If you're a lower cadence, you're much more of that sort of grinder sort of nature, or maybe that endurance nature. That might help dictate. But in terms of optimal cadence, we hear that term thrown around all the time, but really it's finding what is comfortable, because usually the body's going to tell you what is comfortable. That genetic fiber type makeup, the lower body stuff that I said we can't change before, is going to dictate what cadence you've got. Your crank length is going to dictate your cadence. I've just moved from the standard cranks that were on about 170 mil that came with my road bike, just put 165 mils on the other week. I've noticed instantly that my cadence is able to pick up a little bit easier because it's a little bit more appropriate for my body and actually fits my my makeup in terms of my sizing and things like that. Much better fit on the bike, improves my efficiency on the bike as well. I'm able to turn a little bit more power, a little bit more comfortably, getting much more bang for buck. So cadence we can manipulate though. Or if we're going up a climb, we can spin a little bit faster if we've got a lesser resistance. We can grind a little bit more on the flats. If you're time trialing, you might want to have a little bit slower cadence. We know in things like triathlon, having a little bit lower cadence, the old thinking of really fast cadence to then be able to run well off the bike isn't so much the case anymore. The lower cadence, not necessarily super low, but a little bit more low to moderate sort of cadence and sort of ticking along pretty comfortably is actually a much better method for inducing that better run off the bike, is what we're starting to notice in some of the research and some of the practical side of things in terms of athletes racing as well. So all of these things we can manipulate, but again, we can only manipulate them to an extent, because going and spinning, if you're someone who naturally will spin at 80 or 90 RPM, if you try and spin at 110 the entire race, you're probably going to burn yourself out, and vice versa. So cadence is more than individualized based on some of those factors that we can't change, but within a race, we can actually manipulate our cadence. As we know, you can bring it up and down to sort of suit the needs of where you're at in the race. The last thing I'm going to touch on here is what we call the effectiveness of your force onto the pedal. What is the interaction between your shoe, your cleat, the positioning of your cleat, where your foot is, where are you producing that force, what the angle of, attack in terms of the force production, or the vector is what we call it, the direction of the force going through the pedal. Things like carbon-soled shoes, making sure if you do have a carbon-soled cycling shoe, that we've got a correct cleat position right under the strongest or the biggest part of the foot where we're going to produce as much of the force, and we're actually interacting with the pedal appropriately so we can make the most of that carbon sole. If you don't have carbon sole shoes, you might start to pick up a little bit of gain. It's probably something at the amateur level you won't notice as much, but as you get higher and higher and producing more power, you will start to notice that carbon sole is going to be more useful for you. But like I said, cleat position's a big one, not only from an injury perspective, but as part of your bike fit, you should be worrying about where is my foot interacting with the pedals, because that's going to lead to some efficiency changes in terms of making sure you're getting best contact with the pedals as well. But again, it's something you can change, but then we're limited on, well, I've only got so much position on the shoe, or I've only got, I can only move it into the perfect spot. Once it's in the perfect spot, there's not much more I can do other than I have to actually apply more force in the pedals, which more comes down to the conditioning in the legs. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with, and I'm not going to cover it too much, is the battle between efficiency and working on efficiency versus just getting fitter. There is a place for it. Like I said, there's so much we can change within reason. Bike fit, our cadence, understanding that pedal and foot interaction. All of those things we can change, but keep in mind that a lot of it is determined by, once we do make some of those manipulations, then we're kind of capped. It's not something you can go and train necessarily. It's something that's generally limited, and it's majorly substituting in and out things that aren't actually within our body, like components on the bike, that is going to increase our efficiency. Getting fitter is then going to capitalize on that efficiency. So it really is a balance similar to what we have with runners. It's not just about what output you can do or how much oxygen you can use and how efficient your internal is. It's also about the running economy side of things. Does the shoe work for you, etc.? Your technique, all of that comes into it. We're talking similar things on the bike here. So you do still need to focus on improving your fitness overall, but making sure that your efficiency is there. You're just going to capitalize on the fitness, and that's why I think it's really important to understand. One or the other is not going to be the right way forward for everyone. It's not going to solve all your issues, if that makes sense. Working on just your efficiency will only get you so far. Working on just your fitness will only get you so far. Working them together, we're going to get the best outcome. Makes perfect sense. So in a future video, I'm going to cover things like aerodynamics, which obviously add another layer to the whole bicycle conversation. But if you have any questions about the cycling efficiency side of things, anything I've covered today, please let me know down in the comments. What are your thoughts on cycling efficiency? What are some of the things that you've manipulated out of those factors I talked about that you've seen some gains or some improvements in? Any component changes? As I mentioned, 165mm cranks has been a game changer for me. Have you gone to something similar, or have you changed the other way? You're a much taller athlete, so you need longer cranks. Really interested to hear your thoughts on this discussion. Great question that you had come through over on Instagram. Head over there at NJ_sportscience. Ask your questions, because they do turn into videos like this and help us create some great content for our subscribers on the channel, but everyone who is watching, and continue to subscribe to the channel and keep growing this great community we've got. We're getting very close to 2,500. Really do want to hit that by the end of the year. It's less than 50 away. Share this video with your friends. Share the channel with your friends who might be interested. Get them to subscribe as well, and we'll tick off that benchmark pretty sort of soon. If everyone did that with one person, everyone subscribed, we'd be smashing that benchmark in no time. So thanks again for joining us on this one. And I've talked a little bit long today, but sort of interesting topic around that cycling efficiency, and we'll be heading a little bit more down that path and some aerodynamics and that in the not too distant future. That is it for today. I'll leave it there, and we'll see you in the next one.